Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. The Fifth Seal of Elyorn. The world of Elyorn was born of a song, a single, pure note held in the silence of the void that blossomed into fire and water, stone and wind. And from the harmony of these elements, life emerged. But every song has its counterpoint, every light its shadow. The first ones, those beings of primordial thought, saw the fragility of their creation and feared the entropy that gnawed at its edges, a force they named Mor'gar, the Great Silence. To guard against the day of its return, they forged 4 artifacts of immense power, the Rings of Seal. The ring of unquenchable flame, hidden in the heart of a dying star that fell to earth. The ring of the deep well, sunk beneath the crushing pressures of the abyssal sea. The ring of the unyielding mountain, buried where the roots of the world grip the bones of eternity. And the ring of the ceaseless zephyr, placed high where the air is thin and the sky bleeds into the stars. But the first ones in their wisdom knew that stone, water, fire, and air were but instruments. The true lock, the living keystone, required a soul. And so they wove a fifth seal, a prophecy not of an object, but of a being. The fifth seal of life, a vessel of pure essence, born not to command the elements, but to unite them with the one force Mor'gar could not comprehend, could not corrupt, could not silence, the boundless, defiant power of love. For ages, the prophecy was guarded by an order of priests in the secluded Temple of Seals, a whispered hope against the coming dark. That dark began to stir not with a cataclysm, but with a whisper in the ear of an ambitious man. His name was Varhan, and he was a merchant of things not found on any ledger. He traded in secrets, in regrets, in the dark potential of the human heart. In forgotten scrolls and blasphemous texts, he learned of Mor'gar, and he saw not an end, but an opportunity. He would not serve the darkness, he would harness it. And so his agents, men with hollow eyes and souls bartered for power, began to scour the land, seeking the key to the prison they sought to open. It was on a day of soft, gray rain that the old warrior, Lian Kairos, felt the first tremor of his returning destiny. He was a man who wore his past like a heavy cloak, his broad shoulders permanently stooped not from labor, but from the weight of memory. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, had seen too much blood spilled on beautiful grass, too many flags raised over fields of the dead. He had laid his sword down years ago, vowing never to lift another, and had found a semblance of peace in the simple, honest work of a carriage driver, ferrying merchants and messages along the muddy King's Road that wound through the foothills of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. He was waiting for a passenger outside a nameless inn, the scent of wet earth and horses thick in the air, when the old priest found him. Eleomornegelus was so ancient he seemed to be made of parchment and dust, his back bent double, his hands gnarled like old roots. Yet his eyes held a light that was ageless and piercing. He leaned heavily on a staff of dark, polished wood, and beside him stood a young woman. Lian's breath caught in his throat. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her hair was the color of dark honey, and her eyes held the deep, warm green of a forest glade after a rain. She wore a simple, travel-stained dress, but there was a luminescence to her, a quiet grace that made the drab yards seem brighter. Her name was Kiya. "I need passage to the Silverwood," the old priest's voice was a dry rustle, but firm. "For myself and my charge." Lian grunted, wiping rain from his face with a calloused hand. The Silverwood is elven land. They don't take kindly to men, especially not now, with the whispers of war in the east. He had heard the tales of villages going silent, of shadows moving with purpose in the night. He had dismissed them as the usual fears. Now, looking at the pair, he felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The need is urgent, Elio insisted, his gaze unwavering. The shadows are lengthening, Master Kairos. You of all men must feel it. The use of his old name, the name he had not heard spoken in a decade, was like a physical blow. Lian's jaw tightened. I am just a driver. I don't feel anything but the rain and the ruts in the road. He turned to check the harness on his horses, a pair of sturdy, placid bays. But he could feel the young woman's eyes on him. There was no fear in them, only a profound and unsettling curiosity, as if she were looking past the weary driver and seeing the ghost of the warrior he had been. It was Kiya who spoke then, her voice soft, yet clear as a bell. The rain is just a veil. It makes the world clean for a little while. There is no malice in it. Lian looked at her, truly looked, and for a fleeting moment, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. He gave a curt nod. Get in. It's a long ride. The journey began in silence, the only sounds the steady clop of hooves, the creak of the carriage, and the endless patter of the rain. Lian drove, his mind a battlefield of old ghosts. He remembered the clang of steel, the screams of men and horses, the terrible, beautiful, and futile glory of it all. He had fought for kings and causes, and in the end, all he had was a soul stained with ash and a heart that felt like a cold stone in his chest. Inside the carriage, Elio watched the landscape roll by, his ancient face grim. He knew what pursued them. The attack on the Temple of Seals had been swift and brutal. He had barely escaped with Kiya, the last acolytes giving their lives to hold back Varhan's shadow wraiths. Kiya herself had been born in that temple, a child of the prophecy, her very existence a secret guarded for 17 years. She knew she was important, different, but the full scope of her destiny was a mystery even to her. She felt the world as a tapestry of interconnected life, a constant, humming song of growth and decay. But lately, a dissonant note had entered the symphony, a cold silence that spread like a stain. On the third day, the rain stopped, and the sun broke through the clouds, painting the world in gold and green. They were climbing now, the air growing thin and crisp. It was then that Kiya, unable to bear the silence any longer, climbed out to sit beside Lian on the driver's bench. You carry a great sadness, she said, not as a question, but a simple statement of fact. Lian kept his eyes on the road. It's the common burden of mankind, girl. Is it? She asked. I think most people carry small sorrows, like pebbles in a shoe. Yours is a boulder on your back. He glanced at her, irritated, but her expression was not one of pity, but of genuine inquiry. War, he said shortly. It leaves a mark. You were a great warrior, she said. Elio told me. He said you were called the Unbroken. A bitter laugh escaped Lian's lips. A poetic name for a man too stubborn to die. There is no greatness in survival. Only luck. Kiya was silent for a long while, watching a hawk circle high above in the vast, blue expanse. The hawk kills to live. It is the way of the world. but it does not kill for the joy of it. It does not hate its prey. Your war, was it like the hawk? Or was it something else? Her question struck a chord so deep it vibrated in his very bones. He had never framed it that way. His wars had been about borders, about slights, about the ambitions of old men in distant castles. There had been no purity in it, no necessity. Only a grinding, bloody machine. It was something else, he admitted, his voice low. Something less. That night, as they made camp in the lee of a great granite outcrop, the attack came. It began with the horses, who grew skittish, their eyes rolling white in the firelight. Then the wind died, and an unnatural cold settled over the clearing. Elio was on his feet instantly, his staff held before him. "They have found us," the old priest whispered, his voice tight with fear. From the shadows between the trees, figures emerged. They were not quite men, their forms shifting and indistinct, as if made of solidified smoke. They had no faces, only pits of deeper darkness where eyes should be, and they carried swords of a cold, black metal that seemed to drink the light from the fire. Shadow wraiths, creatures of Mor'gar, given form by Varhan's will. Lian's body moved before his mind could protest. Years of ingrained instinct took over. He shoved Kiya behind him and grabbed the heavy tire iron from the carriage. It was no sword, but it was solid and heavy in his hands. "Stay behind me," he growled. The wraiths moved with a silent, fluid speed. Lian met the first one, his makeshift weapon crashing against its dark blade. The impact jarred his arms, a cold, numbing sensation spreading up from the point of contact. He fought with the grim efficiency of a man who had danced with death 1,000 times, his movements economical and brutal. He was no longer the weary driver, he was the unbroken, a force of nature as elemental as the storm. He broke the knee of one wraith, shattered the arm of another, his every move a testament to a skill he had tried so hard to forget. But they were too many. For every one he disabled, 2 more seemed to ooze from the darkness. Elio stood his ground, chanting in an ancient tongue, a soft, white light emanating from his staff. Where the light touched the wraiths, they hissed and recoiled, but the priest's strength was fading, the light flickering. One of the wraiths slipped past Lian's guard, its black blade aimed straight for Kiya's heart. Time seemed to slow. Lian saw the terror in her eyes, but also a deep, resolute light. He roared, a raw, primal sound of denial, and threw himself in front of her, taking the blow on his shoulder. Agony, cold and sharp as frozen glass, lanced through him. He stumbled, his vision swimming. But as the wraith raised its blade for the killing strike, something extraordinary happened. Kiya, seeing Lian fall, did not scream or cower. She stepped forward, placing herself between the warrior and the creature. She raised her hands, not in a gesture of defense, but of offering. And she began to sing. It was not a song in any language Lian knew. It was a melody of pure, unadulterated life. It was the sound of a seed breaking through the soil, of a river carving through stone, of a mother's first sight of her child. It was the song of life itself. A visible wave of power, shimmering like heat haze on a summer day, erupted from her. It washed over the wraiths, and where it touched, they did not scream or burn, they simply unraveled. Their dark forms dissolved into motes of harmless light that flickered and died, like embers in the wind. Silence returned to the clearing, broken only by Lian's ragged breathing and the crackle of the fire. The cold was gone. Kiya stood trembling, the light around her fading. She turned and knelt beside Lian, her hands going to the wound on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, a stark contrast to the icy pain. A soft, green glow emanated from her fingertips, and as Lian watched, stunned, the bleeding stopped, and the flesh began to knit itself together, leaving only a pale, silvery scar. Her eyes met his, filled with a turmoil of fear and wonder. I didn't know I could do that. Elio stumbled over, his face ashen but triumphant. The fifth seal awakens, he breathed. The power of life, to heal, and to unmake that which is unliving. Lian sat up, his body aching, his mind reeling. He looked from the ancient priest to the miraculous young woman. The simple world of carriage routes and passenger fares was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The boulder of his past was still on his back, but now, for the first time in a decade, he felt a reason to carry it. He had tried to protect her out of instinct, but she had saved him with a power that defied all the brutal logic of his existence. He looked at Kiya, at the life that shone from her, and he felt something stir within the cold stone of his heart. It was not yet love, not yet even understanding. It was the first, fragile crack of light in a long-sealed tomb. It was the beginning of a journey not just to the elven forests, but into the very heart of what it meant to be alive in a world besieged by shadow. The road ahead was dark and fraught with peril, but as he looked into her green eyes, Lian Kairos, the unbroken, knew he would follow it to the end. The days that followed the attack were a blur of weary travel and hushed conversations. The wound on Lian's shoulder, marked by the silvery scar, was a constant, cold reminder of the unnatural enemy they faced. It ached with a dull throb that had nothing to do with flesh and everything to do with the shadow that now dogged their steps. He no longer drove the carriage with the detached boredom of a hired hand. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal cry, sent his senses into a sharp, military alertness. The warrior he had buried was now fully exhumed, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his body tense and ready. Kiya, for her part, seemed both troubled and illuminated. The outburst of power had shaken her to her core. She would sit for hours, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden seat, her gaze turned inward. She confessed to Lian and Elio that it had felt like tapping into a vast, humming network, a web of life that connected the towering pines to the moss beneath their feet, the hawk in the sky to the worm in the earth. To touch the shadow race was to touch a void in that web, a nothingness that her very essence had rushed to fill, to correct. The act had been as instinctive as breathing, but the aftermath left her feeling hollow and drained, as if she had poured a part of herself into that terrible emptiness. Elio, though weakened by his efforts to hold the race at bay with his holy light, became their fervent guide and scholar. As the carriage rolled north, he spoke of the old lore, his voice a steady rhythm against the creak of the wheels. He told them of the 4 rings, not as mere magical trinkets, but as focal points, great anchors that tethered the elemental forces of Elyorn to the will of its creators. The ring of the unyielding mountain is not just a piece of rock, he would say, his eyes distant. It is the patience of the continent, the enduring strength that withstands the ravages of eons. The ring of the deep well is the memory of the oceans, the cradle from which all life first sprang. The ring of the ceaseless zephyr is the breath of the world, the carrier of seeds and songs, of change and new beginnings. And the ring of unquenchable flame is the spark of creation itself, the purifying fire that forges and destroys. And the fifth? Kiya asked one evening, her voice small in the vastness of the twilight. What is my ring? Elio looked at her, his gaze filled with a profound and ancient tenderness. You are the vessel, child. The fifth seal is not a ring to be worn, but a state of being to be achieved. The prophecy calls it the keystone of life. The four elemental rings are power, vast and impersonal. You are the meaning. You are the reason for the power. Without the keystone, the lock cannot be turned. Without life, the elements are merely forces without purpose, a song without a heart. Lian listened to all this, his silence a heavy cloak around him. He understood tactics, supply lines, and the breaking point of a shield wall. This talk of world songs and elemental keystones was a language foreign to him. Yet, he could not deny the evidence of his own eyes. He had seen Kiya unravel creatures of shadow with a song. He had felt her warmth heal a wound that should have festered with a lingering chill. Her existence challenged every cynical truth he had built his life upon. Their destination was the Silverwood, the ancient and secluded realm of the elves. The air began to change as they climbed higher into the foothills. The scent of pine and damp earth grew stronger, and the light took on a filtered, green-gold quality, slanting through the canopy of trees that grew taller and more majestic with every league. These were no ordinary trees, their bark was pale, almost silver, and their leaves whispered secrets in a language just beyond human comprehension. The very atmosphere hummed with a quiet, potent magic that set Lian's teeth on edge. It was alive in a way that the human kingdoms, for all their noise and bustle, never were. They were met at the border not by a wall, but by a presence. A dozen figures emerged from the dappled shadows beneath the trees, moving with a grace that made them seem part of the forest itself. They were tall and slender, their features sharp and elegant, their eyes holding the ancient, knowing calm of the woods. They carried bows of pale, polished wood, and their arrows were fletched with feathers of iridescent blue. Their leader, a stern-faced elf with hair the color of moonlight, stepped forward. "Your kind are not welcome here, humans," he said, his voice melodious but cold as a mountain stream. "The Silverwood is closed. The shadows gather, and we tend to our own." It was then that Elio emerged from the carriage, leaning heavily on his staff. He spoke a few words in the flowing, liquid tongue of the elves, his accent old and formal. He presented a small, carved token, a piece of petrified wood inscribed with a single, complex rune. The elf captain's demeanor changed instantly. The cold suspicion in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of awe, and then of grave concern. "The seal-bearer," the elf whispered, his gaze shifting to Kiya, who had stepped down from the carriage. He bowed his head, a deep, respectful gesture. "The Grove Mother has spoken of your coming. You are expected." "But the man," he said, his eyes flicking back to Lian with undisguised mistrust, "he carries the stink of iron and old blood." "He is under my protection," Kiya said, her voice firm, though Lian saw the slight tremor in her hands. "He is my guardian." The elf captain looked skeptical, but he nodded curtly. "As you wish. Follow. And do not stray from the path. The woods have eyes, and not all of them are friendly." They were escorted deep into the Silverwood, leaving the carriage behind. The journey on foot was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with the scent of blooming night flowers and damp moss. Bioluminescent fungi glowed with soft blues and greens on the trunks of the great trees, and the very path they walked on seemed to be made of intertwined roots that shifted subtly to guide their steps. They crossed bridges of living wood that arched over crystal-clear streams, and saw deer with coats of dappled silver watching them from clearings with intelligent, unafraid eyes. They were brought to the heart of the elven realm, a city that was not built, but grown. Dwellings were carved into the vast, hollow trunks of the silverwood trees, connected by graceful, winding staircases that spiraled up into the canopy. At the center of it all was the Great Glade, a massive clearing where the largest tree Lian had ever seen stood, its branches fanning out like a canopy to cradle the sky. This was the seat of the Elven King. It was there, in the dappled light of the glade, that they met Princess Elyorn. She was practicing a melody, her voice rising and falling in an aria that seemed to mimic the wind through the leaves. She was as beautiful as the legends said, with hair like spun starlight and eyes the color of violets. But there was a deep sorrow in her song, a melancholy that spoke of a people who had seen too many winters, who felt the weight of the growing shadow pressing against their borders. When she saw the newcomers, her song trailed off. Her eyes passed over Lian and Elio and settled on Kiya. A strange recognition passed between them, a silent communion of two souls who understood they were pieces of a larger, unfolding design. That night, a council was held in the glade under the light of the twin moons. The Elven King, a majestic figure with a crown of woven living vines, listened as Elio spoke of Varhan, of the awakened shadow race, and of the urgent need to find the rings of seal before the warlock could claim them. The ring of the ceaseless zephyr, Elio said, his voice ringing in the quiet glade. The prophecies place it here, in the highest reaches of the silverwood, where the winds of the world are born. It must be awakened, Your Majesty. The time has come. The king's face was grim. We have guarded the place of the zephyr for generations. It is a sacred trust. But the song to awaken it has been lost to us. The last who knew its melody faded into the west an age ago. It was then that Princess Elyorn stepped forward. Father, she said, her voice clear and resonant. The song is not lost. It sleeps. I have heard it in my dreams. A fragment, a refrain that repeats. But it is not a song that can be sung alone. It requires a harmony. It requires a reason to be sung. Her violet eyes turned to Kiya. The keystone of life is here. The song was meant for her, as much as it is meant for the wind. A profound silence fell over the glade. The plan was formed with a quiet, desperate urgency. At first light, they would ascend to the windsong spire, the highest peak in the silverwood, a needle of pale rock that pierced the clouds. It was there the ring of the ceaseless zephyr was hidden. The ascent was treacherous. The path was little more than a narrow ledge winding up the sheer face of the spire. The wind held around them, a constant, powerful force that threatened to pluck them from the rock and cast them into the misty abyss below. Lian walked behind Kiya, his body a shield against the gale, his hand always ready to steady her. He said nothing, but his presence was a solid, dependable anchor in the roaring chaos. They reached the summit, a small, flat circle of stone open to the vast, endless sky. In the center of the platform was a simple, unadorned pedestal of the same pale rock. It was empty. "This is the place," Elio said, his words snatched away by the wind. "The ring is here, but unseen. It awaits the key." Princess Aelin stepped forward, her starlight hair whipping around her face. She closed her eyes, seeming to listen to the wind's wild roar. Then, she began to sing. It was the same melody Lian had heard in the glade, but now it was stronger, more confident. It was a song of freedom, of vast open spaces, of storms and gentle breezes, of the invisible force that shaped the world. The wind seemed to still, to listen. The air around the pedestal began to shimmer, like heat haze on a summer day. But the ring did not appear. Aelin's song, though beautiful, was not enough. It was a call, but there was no answer. Aelin opened her eyes, a look of despair on her face. "I cannot complete it. The final note, it is missing." It was then that Kiya stepped forward. She placed a hand on Aelin's arm, and then she turned her gaze to Lian. In his winter sky eyes, she did not see the weary warrior or the reluctant guardian. She saw the man who had thrown himself before a black blade for her. She saw the stubborn, defiant will to protect a single, fragile life. And in that moment, she understood the harmony the song required. It was not just about the element of air, it was about the breath of life, the spirit that gives the wind its purpose. Kiya opened her mouth, and a new sound joined Aelin's melody. It was not a song of power, but of connection. It was the sound of a first breath, of a sigh of relief, of a whispered promise. It was the song of life itself, intertwined with the song of the wind. The effect was instantaneous. The shimmering air above the pedestal coalesced, solidified, and spun. A ring formed from the very atmosphere, a band of swirling, crystalline air that hummed with the power of hurricanes and whispered with the gentleness of a spring zephyr. The ring of the ceaseless zephyr hovered above the stone, turning slowly, its presence making the very sky bow to its command. But their triumph was short-lived. As the ring manifested, a wave of dark power rippled through the air, a counterpoint to the pure energy of the awakening. From the shadows at the edge of the summit, a figure emerged. He was tall and clad in robes of deep gray, his face handsome but cruel, his eyes burning with an intelligent, hungry light. It was Varhan. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a king. "My gratitude," he said, his voice smooth and compelling, echoing strangely in the howling wind. "You have saved me the trouble of finding the key." The song of the elven princess, and the catalyst of the living seal. A fascinating combination. He raised a hand, and tendrils of pure shadow, thicker and more potent than those of his wraiths, lashed out from his fingers, aiming not for them, but for the hovering ring. Lian moved without thought. He shoved Kiya behind him and stood between Varhan and the ring, the tire iron he had stubbornly carried held in a two-handed grip. He was a man facing a god, but his stance was unyielding. Varhan's lips curled in a faint smile. "The broken soldier. I have heard of you. Step aside. You are an insect before a coming storm." Lian said nothing. He merely planted his feet more firmly on the rock. The wind screamed around them, the ring of air pulsing with captured lightning. The first ring was awakened, but the battle for its possession had just begun, on a needle of rock at the top of the world. The confrontation on the Windsong Spire was a clash not of armies, but of wills, a stark drama played out against the canvas of the roaring sky. Varhan's shadow tendrils, like serpents of living night, recoiled from the pulsating aura of the awakened ring, but they did not dissipate. They writhed, testing the boundaries, seeking a weakness. Lian stood his ground, a solitary, weathered rock in the face of the warlock's dark tide. He held no magic, no prophecy. He had only his resolve and the cold, hard iron in his hands. He knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the mountain beneath him, that he could not defeat Varhan. But he could buy time. "You cling to your futility as if it were a virtue," Varhan said, his voice cutting through the wind with unnatural clarity. He took a step forward, and the very air grew heavier, colder. "You fight for a world that has given you nothing but scars and sorrow. Join me. I do not offer empty hopes or fragile loves. I offer power. The power to reshape reality, to never be a victim of its cruel whims again." The words were a poison, tailored perfectly for the wounds in Lian's soul. They spoke to the bitterness he had nurtured, the anger at the lords and kings who had sent good men to die for worthless causes. For a heartbeat, the temptation flickered, to let go, to embrace the cleansing fire of absolute control. Then he felt Kiya's presence behind him, a warm, steady light against the encroaching cold. He remembered the silvery scar on his shoulder, not a mark of pain, but of her healing touch. He remembered the sound of her song unmaking the shadows. Her power was not about control, but about connection. It was the antithesis of everything Varhan represented. "I've had my fill of merchants," Lian growled, his voice low and rough as grinding stones. "Especially those who trade in souls." He lunged. It was not a skilled swordsman's attack, but a brute, desperate charge. He swung the tire iron not at Varhan, but at the coalescing shadow tendrils that reached for the ring. The iron, a substance of the earth, mundane and real, passed through the darkness with a sizzling crackle. The shadows writhed in agitation, their advance momentarily halted. Varhan's amused smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "A gnat," he hissed. He flicked his wrist, and a wave of concussive force, visible as a ripple in the air, slammed into Lian. It lifted him from his feet and threw him back against the stone pedestal. Agony exploded in his ribs, and the world swam in a haze of pain. But in that moment of distraction, Elio acted. The ancient priest slammed his staff onto the rock, and a dome of pure, white light erupted around them, pushing back against Varhan's oppressive aura. The shield was fragile, shimmering like a soap bubble, but it held. "Take the ring!" Elio cried out, his voice strained to its limit. "You must not let him have it." Princess Aelin, her face pale with terror and determination, reached out a trembling hand towards the swirling band of crystalline air. As her fingers neared, the ring stilled its spinning and settled, light as a feather, onto her palm. It was cool to the touch, humming with a contained storm. Varhan's eyes blazed with fury. "You think you can steal what is mine?" He raised both hands, and the shadows around him deepened, gathering into a spear of absolute blackness aimed at Elio's faltering shield. It was Kiya who broke the stalemate. She stepped to the edge of the light dome, facing Varhan directly. She did not sing this time. Instead, she simply looked at him, and in her green eyes, there was no hatred, no fear, only a profound and devastating pity. You are so empty, she said, her voice carrying a strange resonance that silenced the wind itself. You seek to fill the void with power, but it will only make it larger. Mor'gar will not make you whole. It will unmake you. Her words, laced with the innate power of the fifth seal, struck Varhan like a physical blow. He recoiled, a spasm of something that might have been doubt or remembered pain crossing his features. The spear of shadow wavered. It was the chance they needed. Now. Elio gasped, and with a final, monumental effort, he expanded the light dome in a blinding flash. When the light faded, Varhan was gone. The summit was empty save for them, the howling wind, and the lingering chill of his presence. The warlock had been driven back, but not defeated. The cost was high. Elio slumped to his knees, his breathing ragged, the light in his staff dimmed to a faint ember. Lian pushed himself to his feet, every breath a knife in his side. They had survived. They had the first ring. But the victory felt hollow, tasted of ash. They had looked into the face of their enemy and seen the depth of the darkness they faced. The descent from the spire was a somber affair. The elves, who had witnessed the dark power from below, greeted them not with celebration, but with a grim, respectful silence. The ring of the ceaseless zephyr was given to Kiya for safekeeping, resting in a silken pouch that did nothing to quiet its faint, humming energy. It felt both incredibly light and impossibly heavy. That night, in the great glade, the Elven King confirmed their fears. Scouts had returned from the eastern borders with dire news. The shadow was not just a spiritual malaise, it was a physical army. Varhan, from his hidden stronghold, was rallying the monstrous denizens of the blasted lands, the hulking, brutish Gorthul, creatures of stone and rage, and the skittering, chittering Scarvans, who moved in swarms and blighted the land they crossed. They were marching, and their path would lead them across the Ashen Plains, the vast, desolate expanse that separated the Silverwood from the kingdoms of men. You cannot stay here, the king said, his voice heavy with regret. You have the Wind Ring. The fire of creation is your next destination. The ring of unquenchable flame lies in the heart of the sunken star, the crater where the core of a fallen celestial body still burns with an eternal fire. It is located in the desolation of Ma'al, beyond the Ashen Plains. To reach it, you must cross the very path of Varhan's army. Their small fellowship was at a crossroads. Elio was weakened, his magical strength depleted. Princess Aelin insisted on accompanying them. The rings respond to song, to life, she argued. My voice awakened one. It may be needed to awaken another. This is no longer just the concern of men or elves. It is the fate of Elyorn. Lian said nothing. He sat by a small fire, cleaning his tire iron with a methodical, focused intensity. His body ached, his mind was a storm of old battles and new fears. But when Kiya came to sit beside him, her presence was a quiet balm. You are in pain, she said softly. It's nothing, he grunted. It is not nothing, she insisted. You faced him for me. Again. He finally looked at her, the firelight dancing in his weary eyes. It's what I do. It's all I know how to do anymore. That is not true, she said, placing a hand over his. Her touch was warm, and the throbbing in his ribs seemed to lessen. You know how to be steadfast. You know how to hope, even when you pretend you don't. I see it in you, Lian. It is the part of you the darkness cannot touch. Her words settled in him, a small, kindled flame in the cold fortress of his heart. He did not reply, but he did not pull his hand away. Their journey out of the Silverwood was swift. The elves provided them with sturdy, sure-footed horses and supplies for the long, arid trek across the ashen plains. As they rode away from the verdant, living magic of the forest and onto the vast, gray expanse of the plains, the world seemed to drain of color and hope. The sky was a perpetual, bruised yellow, and the wind that swept across the barren land was hot and gritty, carrying the taste of dust and decay. For days they saw nothing but the endless, featureless plain. Then, on the horizon, they saw the smoke. Not from a campfire, but from a pillar of black that stained the sky, a burning village. As they drew closer, the evidence of the army's passage became horrifyingly clear. They came across the ruins of a small farming community. The houses were smoldering husks, the fields were trampled into mud, and the silence was broken only by the cawing of carrion birds. Lian dismounted, his movements stiff. He walked through the devastation, his face a mask of stone. This was not the clean, strategic violence of a battlefield. This was eradication. He saw a child's wooden toy, half buried in the ash. He saw the remains of a hearth, the symbol of a home, now cold and broken. This was the future Varhan offered. A world scoured clean of all such fragile, beautiful things. Kiya wept silent tears, her hand pressed to her mouth. She could feel the echo of the lives that had been here, the sudden, violent severing of their song. The dissonance was a physical pain in her chest. It was here, amidst the ashes of a nameless village, that Lian Kairos finally shed the last of his reluctance. The weary carriage driver was gone. The cynical survivor was gone. What remained was the unbroken, not as a title of stubbornness, but as a vow. He would not let this happen to every village, to every hearth, to every light like Kiya's. He turned to the others, his eyes clear and hard as flint. "We don't avoid his army," he said, his voice cutting through the mournful wind. "We go through it. We find the sunken star. We get the fire ring. And we use them to break him." Elio nodded, a flicker of grim approval in his tired eyes. Aelin tightened her grip on her horse's reins, her jaw set. Kiya looked at Lian, and in his transformed resolve, she saw the first true weapon against the darkness. It was not just love, but the will to defend it. Ahead lay the desolation of Mael and the heart of the fallen star. But between them and their goal marched the Legion of Shadows, and Lian Kairos, for the first time in a long time, was not just running from his past. He was riding towards his purpose. The ashen plains were a purgatory of dust and memory. Each mile further east was a descent into a deeper, more profound desolation. The gray earth was cracked like old pottery, and the skeletal remains of long-dead trees stood as silent sentinels to a land that had forgotten rain. By day, a bruised, oppressive sun beat down upon them. By night, a cold, sharp wind whispered secrets of extinction. They rode in a grim silence, the horror of the burned village a fresh scar on their souls. It was Lian who now led, his instincts as a soldier and campaigner resurfacing with a sharp, painful clarity. He navigated not by landmarks, for there were none, but by reading the subtle lay of the land, seeking the low ground where their passage would raise less dust. He enforced a brutal pace, pushing the horses and themselves to the edge of endurance. They could not afford to be caught in the open by Varhan's scouts. Kiya felt the blight of the land as a constant, draining ache. Where the silverwood had been a symphony of life, the ashen plains were a single, sustained, dying note. She kept the pouch containing the ring of the ceaseless zephyr close to her heart, and its gentle hum of contained wind was a small, vital comfort, a reminder that the world still held pockets of pure, elemental freedom. She watched Lian, the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes never stopped moving, and she saw the armor of the warrior closing around him again. But this time it felt different. It was not a retreat into bitterness, but a forging of a weapon. His protection was no longer a reluctant duty, it was a fierce, focused vow. Princess Aelin, accustomed to the eternal, living grace of the silverwood, suffered in the bleakness. The dust coated her fine clothes and stung her throat. The silence was a physical assault. She found herself humming fragments of old elven lays, not songs of power, but songs of remembrance, of green things and flowing water, as if to hold the memory of them safe in this dead place. Eleomornegelus was the weakest among them. The confrontation with Varhan had drained him of more than just magical strength, it had sapped his vitality. He rode slumped in his saddle, his breathing a shallow rasp. Yet, his spirit remained unbroken. In the evenings, huddled under a makeshift shelter against the biting wind, he would unfold a fragile, ancient map and trace their route with a trembling finger. The desolation of Mael, he whispered, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. It was not always so. Once, it was a verdant valley, the heartland of a great kingdom of men. But in an age-long past, a fragment of a dying star fell from the heavens. It did not bring life, as some legends say. Its core was a shard of primal fire, too pure, too hungry. It burned for a century, not consuming itself, but consuming the life around it. It drank the rivers, scorched the earth, and poisoned the air until all that remained was the desolation. The ring of unquenchable flame was forged there, not to contain the fire of the star, but to contain the concept of fire itself. It is the spark and the inferno, the hearth and the wildfire. Lian listened, his gaze fixed on the distant, shimmering heat haze that marked the edge of the desolation. So we're walking into a furnace to find the one thing that controls it. The ring does not control it, Eleo corrected gently. It is its essence. To awaken it is to understand fire, to commune with it. It is the most volatile of the seals. It can create, or it can annihilate. After 7 days on the plains, they saw the army. They crested a low, dusty rise and looked down into a shallow basin. It was not the main host, but a foraging party, a score of Gorthul, their hulking, gray-skinned bodies like walking boulders, and a swarm of Scarvans, their chittering calls carrying on the wind as they picked over the bones of some long-dead beast. The sight of them, so close and real, sent a jolt of primal fear through the group. Lian motioned for immediate silence, leading them back from the ridge. "We go around," he said, his voice a low whisper. "We have neither the numbers nor the time for a fight." But as they began their wide, cautious detour, a skittering sound, too close, froze them in their tracks. A lone Scarvan, separated from its pack, emerged from behind a rocky outcrop. It was a grotesque creature, all twitching limbs and needle-like teeth, its eyes black and soulless. It saw them and let out a piercing shriek, a call to its brethren. There was no more time for stealth. Lian's sword was in his hand in an instant. He had traded the tire iron for a proper, long-forgotten blade provided by the elves. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion. As the Scarvan lunged, he sidestepped and his blade flashed, severing its head from its body in a single, clean stroke. The shriek was cut short. But the damage was done. From the basin below, answering shrieks rose in a chaotic chorus. The Gorthal bellowed, their heavy feet pounding the earth. "Ride!" Lian commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. "Now! Don't look back!" They spurred their horses into a gallop, kicking up a plume of dust that would act as a beacon for their pursuers. The chase was a nightmare of pounding hearts and straining muscles. Arrows, crude and black-fletched, whistled past them. Lian rode at the rear, a grim rear guard, twisting in his saddle to deflect a missile with his blade. He was the unbroken, holding the line against the tide of filth, his every parry and defensive posture a testament to the skill he had tried to forget. They outran the main group, the superior speed and endurance of the elven horses saving them, but they knew they were marked. Their path was known. The shadow was now actively hunting them. 2 days later, they reached the edge of the desolation of Ma'al. It was a sight that stole the breath from their lungs. The land fell away into a colossal, bowl-shaped crater, miles wide. The ground was not gray here, but black and glassy, as if the very earth had been melted and frozen again. In the center of the crater, the air shimmered with a violent, visible heat. There was no flame to see, only the distortion, a blister on the face of the world. This was the sunken star. The heat that rolled over them was a physical force, dry and suffocating. To enter that place seemed like madness. "The ring is in there?" Aelin asked, her voice faint with disbelief. At the very heart, Elio confirmed, his face pale. "Where the fire is purest." They made camp on the lip of the crater, knowing they could not delay. Varhan's main force could not be far behind. As the twin moons rose, casting a sickly light over the glassy plain, Lian approached Kiya. She was staring into the shimmering heart of the desolation, her face etched with worry. "You are afraid," he said. It was not an accusation, merely an observation. "Aren't you?" she replied, turning to him. "This fire, it feels different from the wind." "The wind is change, it is freedom." "This fire, it is hunger. It is consumption." "What if my song is not enough? What if I cannot harmonize with it?" Lian looked from her anxious face to the terrifying beauty of the crater. "You harmonized with me," he said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "And I was just as barren and angry as this place. Your song, it doesn't need to command the fire. It just needs to remind it what it's for. To warm. To forge. To protect the hearth." He paused, struggling with the unfamiliar terrain of encouragement. "You can do this." His faith, simple and unadorned, was a stronger shield for her than any magic. She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. At first light, they began the descent. The glassy ground was treacherous, sharp and unstable. The heat grew with every step, until it was a struggle to breathe. Their water skins became warm, then hot. Elio could not continue, He remained at the edge of the inner crater, conserving his strength, his prayers a whispered shield against the oppressive energy. Lian, Kiya, and Elyorn pressed on. The air itself seemed to burn their lungs. In the very center, they found it, a pedestal of black obsidian, identical to the one on the Windsong spire. Above it, the air was not just shimmering, it was tearing itself apart, a vortex of incandescent energy that howled with the voice of a billion furnaces. This was the unmanifested ring of unquenchable flame. Elyorn began to sing. It was a song of warmth, of the sun on stone, of the candle in the window guiding a traveler home. Her voice, pure and strong, fought against the roar of the elemental fire. The vortex wavered, pulsed, but did not yield. The song was beautiful, but it was not enough. The fire here was too primal, too wild to be tamed by domestic comfort. Kiya knew what was needed. She stepped forward, the heat blistering her skin. She thought of Lian's words. To forge. To protect. She thought of his sacrifice on the spire, the fierce, protective fury that was a fire in its own right. She did not sing of gentle warmth. She sang of the forge fire that tempers steel. She sang of the wildfire that clears the rotten wood so new seeds can grow. She sang of the defiant, unquenchable spark of life that refuses to be extinguished, even in the face of absolute darkness. Her voice, imbued with the power of the fifth seal, did not try to calm the inferno. It met its rage with understanding, its hunger with purpose. She was not commanding it to be less, she was showing it what it could mean. The vortex of fire convulsed. It pulled inward, collapsing in on itself with a sound like a dying star. Then, it exploded outward in a silent, blinding flash. When their vision cleared, a ring hovered above the pedestal. It was not made of metal or crystal, but of living, moving flame, a band of captured sunlight and heart-of-the-earth magma, beautiful and terrifying. The ring of unquenchable flame pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic heat, no longer a mindless inferno, but a focused, awakened power. As Kiya reached out, the ring cooled to a bearable warmth and settled into her waiting palm. The oppressive heat in the crater lessened, becoming the comfortable warmth of a well-tended fire. But their triumph was met with a new sound, the deep, resonant blast of a war horn, echoing across the desolation from the plains behind them. They turned. On the rim of the great crater, silhouetted against the yellow sky, was a line of figures. Gorthal, Scarvans, and at their center, a tall, gray-cloaked figure. Varhan had found them. And this time, he had brought his legion. They were trapped in the bowl of the sunken star, with the awakened fire ring in their hands and an army at the gates. The war horn's note was a splinter of ice in the stifling heat of the crater. It was not a single blast, but a sequence, a brutal, rhythmic call that spoke of ordered ranks and imminent slaughter. On the rim of the desolation, the silhouettes multiplied, a dark stain spreading along the edge of the glassy bowl. There were hundreds of them. The Gorthal formed a solid, unmovable front, their stone-like fists clutching massive clubs and axes. Behind them, the Scarvans seethed and chittered, a tide of sharp limbs and sharper teeth. And at the center, Varhan stood, a still point in the chaos, his gaze fixed on the small group at the heart of the dead star. Lian's mind, honed by 100 battles, assessed their position with a cold, dispassionate clarity. They were in a killing ground. The glassy, sloping floor offered no cover, no defensible high ground. To charge up the slope against that host was suicide. To stand and fight was a slower, but just as certain, death. Elio! Lian barked, his voice cutting through the paralyzing dread. Can you hold them? A barrier, like on the spire? The old priest, his face ashen, shook his head, his body trembling with exhaustion. The power, it is beyond me now, my boy. That light was my last. I can offer only prayers, and I fear they are too faint to be heard here. Despair threatened to choke them. They had 2 of the great seals, but they were trinkets in the face of this army. The ring of air hummed in its pouch, the ring of fire pulsed warmly in Kiya's hand, but they were keys, not weapons. It was then that Princess Elyorn spoke, her voice thin but steady. The songs of my people are not all for awakening. There are lays of defense, of warding. The song of the unyielding oak. It will not stop them, but it may slow them. It may give us a chance. Lian met her gaze and gave a sharp, grateful nod. It was a slim reed of hope, but it was all they had. He turned to Kiya, his eyes holding hers for a moment that contained a lifetime of unspoken words. When the time comes, he said, his voice low and urgent, you take the rings. You and Elio run for the far side of the crater. Find a path out. I will not leave you, she said, her green eyes blazing with a fire that rivaled the ring she held. You must, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You are the only one who can finish this. The 5th seal. That is what matters. He reached out, his calloused hand briefly covering hers that held the fire ring. The contact was electric, a silent transfer of his resolve, his farewell. Go. Below, on the rim, Varhan raised his hand. The horn blasted once more, and the army began its descent. It was not a charge, but a slow, inexorable advance, a glacier of malice grinding down the slope. The sound was terrifying, the grinding tread of the Gorthul, the skittering cacophony of the Scarvans, a symphony of impending doom. Elyorn closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath despite the scorching air. Then, she began to sing. It was not a melody of beauty, but of endurance. It was a deep, resonant chant, a song of roots gripping bedrock, of trunks weathering storms, of branches that would break but never bend. She poured the last of her strength, the ancient magic of the silverwood, into the notes. The air before them began to thicken. It was not a visible shield, but a zone of resistance. The first line of Gorthul hit it and slowed, their powerful strides becoming labored, as if they were wading through deep water. The Scarvans behind them piled up, their frantic energy frustrated. Elyorn's song was a wall of will, and for a glorious, fleeting moment, it held. Lian did not waste the gift. He stood before the 2 women and the old priest, his sword held ready. He was a single figure against an ocean of hate, but he stood with the unshakable posture of a man who had found his true battlefield. This was not a war for a king or a border. This was for the future. For the song of life itself. The song of the unyielding oak strained, the notes growing ragged. Elyorn's voice cracked with the effort. A Gorthul, larger than the others, roared and burst through the wavering magical field. The spell shattered, and the dam broke. The horde surged forward. Lian met them. He became a whirlwind of steel and fury. He was no longer a man, but a force of nature, the embodiment of the unbroken. He did not try to kill them all, that was impossible. His goal was simpler, more brutal, to control the space directly in front of Kiya and the others. He used the slope to his advantage, letting the creatures come to him. His blade was a silver blur, parrying a Gorthal's crushing axe blow, then spinning to disembowel a leaping Scarven. He moved with a terrible, beautiful economy, every motion precise, every strike lethal. He was a master craftsman, and his craft was death. A club grazed his side, and he felt a rib crack. He ignored it. A Scarven's claw ripped across his thigh. He grunted and stomped on its head, feeling the chitinous shell crunch under his boot. He fought in a grim silence, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his world narrowed to the next parry, the next thrust, the next enemy. He was a rock, and the dark tide broke against him. But a rock, no matter how steadfast, will eventually be worn away. A Gorthal's axe, too fast to fully block, slammed into his shoulder, biting deep. Agony, white-hot and blinding, lanced through him. His sword arm went numb, the blade falling from his grasp to clatter on the glassy ground. He staggered, dropping to one knee. He looked up, his vision swimming, and saw Varhan walking calmly through the chaos, his dark army parting for him. The warlock's face was a mask of cold satisfaction. "The broken soldier, finally broken," Varhan said, standing over him. "A noble, if futile, effort. Now, the living seal will be mine." Lian, through a haze of pain, saw Kiya behind him, her face a portrait of anguish. He had failed. He had not bought enough time. Despair threatened to claim him. But then, he saw her expression change. The fear did not vanish, but it was joined by something else, a dawning, terrifying understanding. She looked from Lian, bleeding and broken on the ground for her, to the two rings she held. The air, the breath of life. The fire, the spark of spirit. And she looked within herself, to the fifth seal, the keystone. Varhan reached for her. The power of life, untamed and pure. It will be the final key to unlock the gate. "No," Kiya whispered. Then, her voice grew stronger, ringing out across the battlefield. "You are wrong. It is not a key for your lock." She did not sing a song of unmaking, as she had with the wraiths. She did not try to attack him. Instead, she knelt beside Lian, ignoring the advancing warlock. She placed one hand on his bleeding shoulder, the other on the terrible gash in his thigh. The ring of fire in her palm glowed, not with destructive heat, but with the gentle, mending warmth of a forge that repairs, not destroys. The ring of air hummed, and a clean, fresh breeze, smelling of rain and pine, coiled around them, pushing back the stench of blood and decay. She poured her essence into him, not just healing his wounds, but filling him with her light, her life, her love. The silvery scars on his body from their first meeting began to glow, and the new, grievous wounds knitted together with impossible speed. The pain vanished, replaced by a surging, vibrant strength. It was more than healing, it was a transfusion of pure, defiant hope. Lian gasped, his eyes flying open. He felt not just whole, but more than he had ever been. The weariness of a lifetime was scoured away, replaced by a clarity of purpose as sharp as his sword. Varhan halted, his confidence faltering. He saw the light emanating from Kiya, saw Lian rise to his feet, his body whole, his eyes burning with a fire that was not of magic, but of spirit. The warlock saw the bond between them, not as a weakness to be exploited, but as a power he had fundamentally failed to comprehend. "What is this?" Varhan hissed, taking a step back. "This is the fifth seal," Kiya said, her voice resonating with a power that shook the very air. "It is not a thing to be taken. It is a choice to be made. It is love. And you cannot have it." In that moment, surrounded by the army of darkness, with the power of two elemental rings flowing through her and into the man she loved, Kiya understood the full scope of her destiny. She was the keystone because she could unite, because she could love. And that was a power that no darkness, no matter how ancient, could ever defeat. The battle was not over, but the tide had turned, not by a sword, but by a heart that refused to be broken. The power that flowed from Kiya was not an explosion, but a revelation. A wave of soft, golden light expanded from her kneeling form, washing over the glassy floor of the crater. It did not harm the monstrous army, not directly. It did not burn the Gorthul or disintegrate the Scarvans. Instead, it did something far more subversive, far more terrifying to the essence of Mor'gar. The light touched a Gorthul, and the creature hesitated, its brutish face contorted not in rage, but in confusion. It looked at its own stone-like hands as if seeing them for the first time. The light touched the Scarvans, and their mindless chittering faltered, replaced by a bewildered silence. The wave of golden energy was a memory, a reminder of what the world was before the shadow, a place of sun on stone, of wind in the trees, of a life not driven by a hunger for oblivion. It was the antithesis of the void that Varhan promised, and for a moment, it cleaved through the psychic dominion he held over his legions. The battle did not resume. It simply stopped. The horde stood in a stunned, silent tableau. Varhan alone seemed immune to the pacifying effect, but he was not untouched. He recoiled as if physically struck, his handsome face twisting into a mask of revulsion and something akin to fear. "What sorcery is this?" he snarled, his voice losing its smooth composure, becoming a ragged thing. This sentiment. This weakness." "It is not weakness," Lian said, his voice strong and clear, his body thrumming with the vitality Kiya had poured into him. He stood, whole and unbroken, and retrieved his sword from the ground. The steel seemed to sing in his hand. "It is the one weapon you never learned to forge." He did not charge. He simply stood beside Kiya, a guardian not out of duty, but out of choice. His presence was a declaration. The fight was no longer about survival, it was about preservation. Varhan stared at them, at the bond that was a tangible force in the air, a harmony that made the dissonance of his own power screech in protest. He saw his army, momentarily unmoored from his will. He was not defeated, but his moment of absolute victory had been stolen. With a roar of pure, undiluted fury, he gestured, and a vortex of shadow swallowed him. The remaining Gorthul and Scarvans, freed from the golden light's brief dominion, blinked and, finding their master gone, broke into a disorganized retreat, scrambling back up the slopes of the crater into the ashen plains. Silence returned to the heart of the sunken star, deeper and more profound than before. The immediate threat was gone, but the air was heavy with the cost. Aelin slumped to the ground, exhausted from her song of warding. Elio stumbled toward them, his face a mixture of awe and profound relief. Lian turned to Kiya, who was still on her knees, the glow around her fading. He reached down and gently helped her to her feet. Her face was pale, her body trembling from the immense outpouring of power. "You saved us," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer name. "No," she whispered, leaning into his strength. "We saved each other." The prophecy. "I understand it now, Lian. The fifth seal isn't just me. It's the connection. It's what we create between us. It's love." The word hung in the air, no longer an abstract concept from an old priest's scroll, but a living, breathing truth written in sacrifice and healing. Their respite was brief. Elio, consulting his ancient maps and the whispers of his failing strength, knew where they must go next. With 2 rings awakened, the others would be stirring, their elemental call growing stronger. The ring of the deep well, the memory of the oceans, was their destination. It lay in the sunken city of Aquilon, a place swallowed by the sea millennia ago, its location a secret kept by the reclusive fisherfolk of the western coasts. And the final elemental ring, the ring of the unyielding mountain, was said to be in the Stoneheart Deeps, the sacred caverns of the dwarven clans deep beneath the world. But first, they had to escape the desolation and cross a continent now crawling with Varhan scouts. The journey that followed was a harrowing test of endurance and stealth. They traveled by night, hiding by day in caves and thickets, the memory of the crater battle a constant reminder of the stakes. The bond between Lian and Kiya deepened into something unshakable. He was her shield, his senses ever alert, his strategies keeping them one step ahead of the hunting packs. She was his light, her presence a balm that kept the darkness of his past at bay, her growing understanding of her power a constant source of wonder. It took them a full turning of the moon to reach the jagged coastline, to find the hidden coves where the fisherfolk dwelled. These were a hardy, suspicious people, their lives dictated by the moods of the sea. They spoke of Aquilon in hushed, reverent tones, a city of pearls and light that now slept with the leviathans. It was Kiya who won them over. Not with power, but with empathy. She listened to their stories, felt the rhythm of the tides in her own soul, and when she sang a simple, wordless melody of the sea's eternal return, the fisherfolk saw the ocean's own spirit in her eyes. They provided a submersible craft, a vessel of enchanted, air-filled bladders and crystal windows, and a guide to take them to the sunken city. The descent into the abyssal gloom was a journey into another world. The pressure mounted, the light faded to a deep, eternal blue, and strange, bioluminescent creatures drifted past the crystal panes. The sunken city of Aquilon was a breathtaking necropolis of white coral and sculpted marble, its towers and plazas home now to forests of kelp and schools of silver fish. The ring of the deep well was found in the city's central temple, on an altar of mother of pearl. To awaken it, Kiya did not need Aelin's song. She simply pressed her hand against the altar and opened her heart to the immense, patient, life-giving memory of the water. The ring, a band of shifting, liquid sapphire, rose from the altar and flowed into her keeping. Their quest for the final elemental ring led them inland, to the fortress cities of the dwarves, carved into the bones of the world-spine mountains. The dwarves were a pragmatic, insular people, masters of stone and metal, who cared little for the troubles of the surface world. They denied them entry to the Stoneheart deeps, fearing the shadow that walked above. It was Lian who found the way. He did not appeal to kings or prophecies. He went to the warriors, the veterans of the deep dwellers' own endless wars against the things that gnawed at the roots of the world. He spoke to them not as a prophet's guardian, but as a soldier. He spoke of tactics, of holding a line, of an enemy that would not stop until every fortress, every hearth, every hall was scoured to dust. He earned their grudging respect, and they, in turn, persuaded their king. In the silent, profound darkness of the Stoneheart deeps, amidst crystals that glowed with their own inner light, they found the ring of the unyielding mountain on a plinth of unworked diamond. Kiya awakened it not with a song, but with a shared silence with Lian, a communication of the enduring strength they had found in each other. The ring, a band of dark, unbreakable obsidian, settled into her palm, completing the elemental quartet. They now possessed all 4 rings of seal: the air, the fire, the water, the earth. They hummed with power in their pouches, a harmonious chord of creation itself. But the 5th seal, the keystone of life, remained a mystery within Kiya. They knew what it was, but not how to wield it as the lock against Mor'gar. It was Elio, in his final, fading moments, who pointed them to the last leg of their journey. Gathered around a small fire in a dwarven hall, his breath a faint mist in the cold air, he spoke. The temple of the final seal, it is not a place of stone. The prophecies say it is where the world began, where the first one sang the first note. It is a place of confluence, where the lines of power drawn by the 4 rings meet. You will know it when you feel it. There you must become the keystone. There, you must complete the lock. He did not wake the next morning. The ancient priest, the last guardian of the old prophecy, had passed his burden to them. They buried him in the deep stone, a fitting tomb for a man who had carried the weight of the world for so long. Guided by the pull of the 4 rings, a magnetic draw that grew stronger with each passing day, Lian, Kiya, and Aelin traveled to the one place in Elyorn that was no place at all. It was a barren, windswept plain at the exact center of the continent, marked only by a circle of standing stones so ancient they seemed to be extensions of the earth itself. This was the temple of the final seal. As they stepped into the center of the circle, the 4 rings flared to life, rising from their pouches of their own accord. They hung in the air around Kiya, the swirling zephyr, the pulsing flame, the flowing well, the unyielding mountain. Their power wove together, creating a lattice of pure, elemental energy, a cage of light, a lock of unimaginable complexity. But it was incomplete. The center was empty. And from the shadows between the standing stones, Varhan emerged. He was no longer the composed merchant of power. He was ragged, desperate, his eyes burning with a frantic hunger. The failure at the sunken star had broken something in him. He was now less a master of the darkness, and more its most desperate servant. "The rings," he screamed, his voice cracking. "They are mine. The gate must be opened." He threw himself at the lattice of light, but it repelled him, throwing him back with a flash of searing energy. He could not touch them. They were waiting for their keystone. Kiya stood at the center, feeling the immense power of the 4 rings, the beautiful, terrible lock that was ready. She looked at Lian, who stood at the edge of the circle, his sword held ready, his eyes on Varhan, his entire being a testament to his vow to protect her. She looked within herself, to the power of the fifth seal. Love. It was not a gentle feeling. It was a fierce, protective, creative, enduring force. It was the breath in the wind, the spark in the fire, the memory in the water, the strength in the stone. It was the reason for it all. She did not reach for the rings. She reached for Lian. She met his gaze across the circle, and in that look, she poured out everything she was, everything she felt for him. And he, the unbroken warrior, let his own defenses fall, and looked back at her with the same unwavering truth. In that moment of perfect, shared connection, the fifth seal activated. A light erupted from Kiya's heart, not gold, but pure, brilliant white. It was the light of life itself. It shot into the center of the elemental lattice, and the lock clicked shut. The temple of the final seal was complete. The 4 rings blazed, their combined light focusing into a single, radiant beam that shot upwards, piercing the heavens, a column of pure creation that pushed back against the very concept of entropy. Varhan, screaming in denial, was caught in the periphery of the light. He did not burn. He simply faded. The shadow that had clung to him, the power of Mor'gar he had embraced, was unmade by the sheer, undeniable presence of life and love. He vanished, not with a bang, but with a whimper, his ambition and his emptiness erased. And deep in the void, the ancient darkness known as Mor'gar, feeling the prison door slam shut once more, sealed with a lock it could never comprehend, let out a silent roar of frustration and retreated into the endless cold. The light faded. The 4 rings, their purpose fulfilled, gently floated down and settled, inert and silent, into Kiya's hands. The fifth seal within her was no longer a latent power, but a quiet, steady flame. She was the keystone. She had always been. The world of Elyorn was saved. Not by a sword, not by a spell, but by a choice to love in the face of absolute darkness. The memory of that choice, and the power it held, would remain long after the rings were hidden away once more, a new legend woven into the very fabric of the world, a testament that the greatest magic was not to be found in fire or stone, but in the human heart. And so, the Song of Elyorn finds a new harmony, a melody of love and remembrance that will echo through the ages. But every story grows richer when shared. If the journey of Lian and Kiya has moved you, if the mysteries of the seals have captivated your imagination, then let your voice be heard. Your thoughts are a part of this tale now. Subscribe to the channel, so you never miss a step into another world. Let us know you were here by leaving a like, a signal fire in the vastness of the digital realms. And most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments. Which moment resonated with you the most? Was it the song of the silver wood, the stand in the sunken star, or the final revelation in the temple of the final seal? Your insights are the magic that keeps these stories alive. Thank you for listening. Until the next adventure.